My phone buzzed at 11:42 on Christmas Eve, shattering the silence of the penthouse where I nursed a raging fever over final blueprints. Julian claimed he was stuck in a dull board meeting, but the anonymous video playing on my screen told a different story. There he was in 4K resolution, toasting his 22-year-old intern as the genius behind my life's work. In that instant, my fever broke, replaced by a cold need for total destruction. My name is Veronica, and for the last 3 years, I have been the invisible steel spine holding the Thorne family legacy upright. The silence in our penthouse on Christmas Eve was heavy, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. I sat hunched over the drafting table in the living room, surrounded by a fortress of crumpled tissues and empty boxes of cold medicine. My fever was pushing 102 degrees, but the deadline for the Zenith, the billion-dollar skyscraper project that would redefine the city skyline, was immovable. Julian had called me at 8 o'clock, his voice smooth and apologetic, claiming he was trapped in an emergency strategy meeting with the board members. I had believed him because I was too exhausted to do anything else. Then my phone vibrated against the mahogany surface of the desk. It was 11:42 at night. The screen lit up with a notification from an unknown number. There was no text, just a link to a private live stream. My fingers, trembling slightly from the chills racking my body, hovered over the glass before tapping the notification. The video loaded in crisp 4K resolution. The scene was not a sterile boardroom. It was the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, dripping in gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. The elite of the city were there, holding flutes of champagne. And there, center stage, standing under the spotlight, was my husband. Julian looked magnificent. He was wearing the bespoke charcoal suit I had selected for him last month, and the Patek Philippe watch I had saved for 2 years to buy him for our 5th anniversary. But his arm was not resting at his side. It was wrapped possessively around the waist of a girl in a shimmering red dress. I recognized her immediately. Sienna, the 22-year-old intern who had joined the company barely 3 months ago. Julian raised his glass, his smile dazzling the camera. The audio was crystal clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian announced, his voice booming with a charisma that always made my chest ache with pride. "Tonight we celebrate the future. You all know the Zenith as a Thorne development project, but every king needs a muse, the true genius, the breathtaking mind behind the design that will change our skyline forever, is right here beside me. Sienna, my love, take a bow." I stopped breathing. The Zenith was my design. Every beam, every glass panel, every calculation of wind resistance was mine. I had spent 3 years bleeding onto those blueprints while Julian played golf. "On the screen," Sienna giggled, feigning shyness as she buried her face in Julian's shoulder. The camera panned to the front row. My mother-in-law, Beatrix, was clapping so hard her diamond bracelets shook. She looked at Sienna with a warmth and pride she had never, not once in 5 years, directed at me. "She is incredible," Julian whispered into the microphone, pulling Sienna closer. I did not cry. The fever that had been consuming me moments ago vanished, replaced by a clarity so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. I stood up, my legs steady, and walked to the bathroom. I turned on the faucet and splashed freezing water onto my face. I grabbed a towel and looked into the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired, pale, and pathetic. "You are dead," I said aloud to my reflection, my voice raspy but firm. "The good wife is dead." I walked back to the living room, bypassing my workstation. I ignored the company computer and pulled my personal laptop from the bottom drawer of a locked cabinet. I sat down and logged into a secure, private cloud server I had named V Architects. Julian did not know this server existed. He thought I stored everything on the company drive. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Step 1 was simple. I initiated a full backup of the original source files for the Zenith to my private cloud. Then, I accessed the Thorn Development Central server. I located the project files, the ones Julian needed to present to the investors in 48 hours, and activated a dormant script I had written months ago as a failsafe. It was a piece of malware I called the time lock. It would not delete the files, but it would encrypt them behind a quantum-grade firewall that only I had the key to unlock. Once the upload bar hit 100%, I closed the laptop. I went to the bedroom and pulled a small duffel bag from the closet. I did not pack clothes. I did not pack the diamond earrings Julian gave me as an apology for missing my birthday. I packed my external hard drive. I packed the folder containing the legal patent registrations for my structural designs. Finally, I took the framed photograph of my father from the nightstand. The penthouse felt like a tomb as I walked to the door. I paused at the drafting table where the physical blueprints of the Zenith lay spread out. I slipped my wedding band off my finger. It felt light, almost cheap, as I dropped it onto the paper. I grabbed a yellow sticky note and a Sharpie. I wrote 5 words, stuck the note next to the ring, and walked out into the cold night. Congratulations to the new architect. I parked my car a block away from a nondescript brick building in Queens, far removed from the manicured hedges and doormen of the Upper East Side. This was my sanctuary, a 400-square-foot studio apartment I had purchased 2 years ago using funds from a cryptocurrency investment that Julian was too technologically illiterate to even understand. The air inside smelled of dust and stale coffee, but to me, it smelled like freedom. I sat on the floor, leaning against the cold radiator, and let my mind drift back 12 years to where this farce began. We were students at the Architecture University. I was the scholarship student, the valedictorian who survived on instant noodles and 3 hours of sleep. Julian was the heir to the Thorn Empire, a boy who thought a T-square was a weapon and could not draw a straight line to save his life. I remembered the day he cornered me in the library, his eyes wide with the panic of a spoiled child facing his first consequence. "V, come on. You have to help me," he had begged, gripping my arm. "My father is flying in for the final critique. If I fail this thesis, he will cut me off. I just need a little polish." He did not need polish. He needed a miracle. I agreed because my father needed bypass surgery and our insurance had hit its cap. Julian paid for the operation in cash, and I designed his thesis. He graduated with honors. I graduated with a handshake and a mountain of student loans. That was the trap. Julian was not talented, but he was charming. He knew exactly which buttons to press. "We are a power couple. V," he used to whisper in my ear, his voice thick with promised glory. "I am the face. You are the content. I handle the sharks, and you build the aquariums. We will rule this city." I believed him. I was naive enough to think that partnership meant equality. When we got married, Beatrix slid a prenuptial agreement across the table that was thick enough to be a novel. "It is just standard procedure." "Dear," Beatrix had said, her smile not reaching her eyes, "just to ensure clarity. We must protect the family assets from external variables." I signed it without reading a single page. I was in love, and I thought love superseded contract law. I was an idiot. The reality of our marriage settled in like a slow-acting poison. I became a ghost. For the last 5 years, I worked 18 hours a day in the basement office of our home, hunched over drafting tables, ruining my eyesight and my posture. Julian spent his days playing golf at the country club and his nights cutting ribbons at galas. He would come home smelling of expensive scotch and performative exhaustion. "God, the investors were brutal today," he would complain, loosening his tie. I really had to sell our vision, but it wasn't our vision. It was mine. The worst part was watching Julian slowly begin to believe his own lie. He started correcting my sketches, offering vague, useless feedback that I had to politely ignore. I feel like this curve needs to be more dynamic, he would say, waving his hand vaguely. It needs to capture my energy. Don't you think Beatrix made it worse? To her, I was nothing more than glorified staff who happened to share a bed with her son. At tea parties, she would introduce me with a dismissive wave. "This is Veronica," she would say to her friends. "She helps Julian with the paperwork. She is from upstate." Then came Sienna. She was everything I was not 22, vapid, and the daughter of a steel magnate Beatrix was desperate to merge with. Sienna didn't care about architecture. She cared about the prestige of being with a genius. She fed Julian's ego in a way I could not because I was too busy actually doing his job. Back in the studio, I uncorked a bottle of $5 wine I had bought at the corner store. It tasted like vinegar, but as I swallowed it, I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the alcohol. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. I raised the cheap glass to the empty room. "Here is to the new you. Julian," I said softly to the silence. "I hope you know how to calculate load-bearing limits, because the roof is about to cave in." While I was waking up on a thin mattress in a dusty studio in Queens, Julian and Sienna were waking up in silk sheets at the St. Regis, basking in the glow of their own deceit. The morning tabloids had already crowned them the new golden couple of the real estate world, splashing photos of their gala embrace across every homepage. They drank mimosas and read the headlines, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already turned to quicksand. Julian drove Sienna back to our penthouse around 10 o'clock in the morning. He later admitted in court depositions that he had expected to find me there, eyes swollen from crying, begging for a second chance. He wanted the satisfaction of evicting me in front of his new muse. Instead, they walked into a tomb. The apartment was stripped of my personal touch, leaving only the cold, hard furniture. "It is freezing in here," Sienna complained, rubbing her bare arms as she stepped into the foyer. "Babe, fix the heat." "System, set temperature to 72 degrees and turn on main lights," Julian commanded, his voice carrying the arrogance of a man who had never been told no. The smart home system, which I had personally coded to respond to specific voice frequencies and biometric data, remained dark. A red light pulsed on the control panel. "Unauthorized voice pattern detected," the synthetic voice announced, echoing off the marble walls. "Security protocols engaged. Access to utilities denied." "What the hell?" Julian muttered, tapping furiously on the wall panel. "System, override." "It is me. Intruder alert," the system replied flatly. "Locking down perimeter." Before Julian could smash the panel, his phone rang. It was Beatrix. "Julian," my mother-in-law barked through the speakerphone. "Bypassing pleasantries. The board is convening at 2 o'clock. They want to approve the final budget for the Zenith. Bring the detailed structural schematics. And do not embarrass me. I have staked my reputation on this girl of yours being a genius." "Of course, Mother," Julian said, forcing a laugh. "We are heading to the office now. Everything is under control." They arrived at Thorne Development headquarters an hour later. Julian marched into his office, sat in his leather chair, and logged into the central server to retrieve the files I had been working on for 3 years. He clicked on the folder labeled the Zenith. Instead of terabytes of blueprints, rendering data, and load-bearing calculations, a single black window popped up on the giant monitor. In the center of the screen, text in bright green font pulsed rhythmically. "Intellectual property protected. Please contact the owner." Panic began to set in. Julian called the IT department, screaming at the poor technician who came running. "Open it," Julian yelled, pointing at the screen. "I have a meeting in 2 hours. Fix this." The head of IT typed furiously for 10 minutes, sweat beading on his forehead. I can't, sir," he stammered, This encryption, it is quantum grade. It is unlike anything I have ever seen. It is physically locking us out of the hardware. Julian turned to Sienna, his eyes wide with desperation. You are the face of this project now. You stood on that stage. Draw something, sketch the atrium design, so we have something to show the investors. Sienna looked at the drafting paper as if it were an alien artifact. She picked up a pencil and drew a few shaky lines. The chief engineer, who had walked in to check on the commotion, looked at the paper and then at Julian. "Sir," the engineer said, his voice dripping with skepticism, "this is not a structural support. This is a doodle. If we build this, the tower collapses in a week." The phone on Julian's desk rang. It was the lead investor. "Thorne." The investor's voice was icy. "We are hearing rumors of a delay. If we do not see finalized, approved blueprints in 24 hours, we are pulling our funding. All of it." Julian slammed the phone down. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his mobile as he dialed my number. I can only imagine the hope he felt as it rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, my voicemail clicked on. "The subscriber you have just called is currently busy rebuilding her life," my recorded voice said, cheerful and bright. "Please leave a message after the tone. Or don't." Julian threw his phone across the room, shattering the screen against the wall. A moment later, Beatrix stormed into the office, her face a mask of fury. "Find her!" Beatrix hissed, ignoring Sienna, who was cowering in the corner. "You find that ungrateful woman and you get those files. Julian, because if the Zenith fails, I will personally ensure you are written out of the will before the sun sets." I walked into the office of Marcus Stone at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. Marcus was not just the most ruthless intellectual property lawyer in the city. He was also my old college friend and a man who held a personal grudge against the Thorne family for bankrupting his father a decade ago. He looked at the hard drive I placed on his desk like a starving man looking at a feast. "Tell me this is what I think it is," Marcus said, leaning forward. "It is better," I replied, taking a seat. "We call it Project Aegis. 5 years ago, when I found lipstick on Julian's collar for the first time, I made a choice. I could leave then with nothing, or I could stay and build my own insurance policy. I quietly registered every single design, every sketch, and every patent for the Zenith under a holding company I formed in the Cayman Islands. It is called The Architects." Marcus flipped through the employment contract I slid across the desk. His eyes widened as he read the fine print. "This says your employment contract with Thorne Development expired 2 years ago," Marcus said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Exactly," I said, crossing my legs. Julian was so busy chasing skirts and playing celebrity that he forgot to renew my paperwork. He assumed I was just his wife helping out. Legally, for the last 24 months, I have been an independent contractor working without a contract. That means every line I drew, every idea I conceived during that time, belongs solely to me. Thorne Development does not own the Zenith. I do. I then handed him the financial records. "And here is the leverage. Julian has been siphoning funds from the construction budget to pay for Sienna's apartment and gifts for 3 other mistresses. That constitutes embezzlement and fraud against the shareholders." Marcus laughed, a deep, satisfied sound. "I am going to enjoy this. We are not filing for divorce today. Veronica, we are filing for massive copyright infringement and theft of intellectual property." An hour later, a process server walked into the chaotic conference room at Thorne Development. Julian was in the middle of screaming at his engineering team when the man handed him a thick envelope. Julian tore it open, expecting a petition for divorce. "What is this?" Julian stammered, reading the cover sheet. "Lawsuit for $300 million in damages. Immediate cease and desist." The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. This was not a domestic dispute. This was a corporate execution. Meanwhile, Beatrix was frantically working her dark network. She called private investigators, corrupt police officers, and anyone she could bribe to find my physical location. She wanted to drag me back by my hair if necessary, but she hit a wall. I had scrubbed my digital footprint and used the protected identity protocols Marcus had set up. To the world, Veronica Thorne had simply ceased to exist. Back at the penthouse, the cracks were already showing. Sienna was not comforting Julian. She was pacing the room, scrolling through the plummeting stock prices on her phone. Julian, Sienna whined, her voice high and shrill. If they sue for $300 million, what happens to my trust fund? You promised me a heavy allowance. You said you were rich. It was the first time Julian looked at her and saw the greed behind the mascara. He realized she was terrified of losing the lifestyle, not losing him. I made one final phone call that afternoon. I dialed the number of Big Mike, the head foreman of the construction site. He was a good man who had always respected my work while Julian ignored him. Mike, I said when he picked up, it is Veronica. You know those safety specs Julian ignored and the ownership dispute. It is all real. If you pour one more yard of concrete, you might be liable. Ms. Veronica, Mike said, his voice grave. I always knew he was a fraud. I am shutting it down. Boys, pack it up. We are done here. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the construction site of the Zenith was silent. Cranes stopped moving. Trucks turned off their engines. The silence was deafening, and it echoed all the way to Wall Street. Thorne development stock began a free fall, shedding 15% of its value in less than an hour. The empire was not just cracking, it was beginning to crumble. The conference room at Marcus's law firm was encased in glass, offering a panoramic view of the city I was about to conquer. Julian and Beatrix had no choice but to agree to a settlement meeting. The bleeding of their stock price had forced their hand. When they walked in, the contrast was striking. Julian looked like a man who hadn't slept in 48 hours. His bespoke suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot. Beatrix, however, marched in with her chin held high, wearing a Chanel suit-like armor. Trailing behind them was Sienna, clutching Julian's arm, clearly there to mark her territory. Let's get this over with. Beatrix spat as she took a seat, not even looking at me. You ungrateful little vulture. After everything we gave you, a roof over your head, a name, a life, and this is how you repay us, by biting the hand that fed you. She slammed her hand on the mahogany table. I will ruin you, Veronica. I will make sure you never draw a straight line in this town again. You will be blacklisted from every firm from here to Tokyo. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. I didn't say a word. I simply slid a small black USB drive across the polished surface toward Julian. Play it, I said softly. Julian hesitated, but Marcus plugged it into the room's monitor. The video was dated 6 months ago. It showed a very drunk Julian at a private poker game, slurring his words to his friends. Honestly, I don't know how the damn building stands up, the on-screen Julian laughed, spilling his whiskey. Veronica does all the math. I just smile and sign my name. I couldn't design a doghouse if I tried. The silence in the room was deafening. Julian turned pale, shrinking into his chair. Veronica, Julian stammered, his voice trembling. Look, I was drunk. It was just talk. Please. I am under so much pressure. You know how Mother is. You know how the board is. Sienna. She was just a moment of weakness, a stupid mistake. Please, baby, come back. For the company. For us. We can fix this. Sienna's jaw dropped. She released Julian's arm as if it burned her. A mistake, I am a mistake, Julian. How dare you? She stood up, her face flushed with anger and desperation. "You can't dump me, you can't, because I am pregnant. That's right, I am carrying your child." The air left the room. Beatrix's eyes snapped to Sienna, and for the first time, her expression softened into something resembling warmth. She turned on me with renewed viciousness. "Did you hear that?" Beatrix hissed, a cruel smile forming. "A child, a true heir, something you never gave us. This changes everything. You will sign the divorce papers. You will walk away with nothing, and you will do it now, or I will bury you so deep nobody will find you." I looked at Sienna, then at Julian, and finally at Beatrix. A small, cold laugh escaped my lips. "Sit down, Sienna," I said. "You are not pregnant. Or if you are, it certainly isn't Julian's." "You liar!" Sienna screamed. "You are just jealous." "Am I?" I pulled a medical file from my briefcase and tossed it onto the table. 3 years ago, Julian had a vasectomy. He didn't tell anyone. Not you, Beatrix, certainly not me. But I found the insurance claims. Julian froze. He looked at the file, then slowly turned his head to look at Sienna. The horror in his eyes was genuine. You said you were on the pill," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "And I am sterile. So who is it?" "Sienna, the pool boy. Or maybe my driver." Sienna turned white. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The lie hung in the air, exposed and rotting. Beatrix looked at Sienna with pure disgust, the heir narrative shattering instantly. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "Here is the deal," I said, my voice cutting through their chaos. "You want the Zenith? You want to save your company? Fine. You buy the copyright from me. The price is $50 million. Cash, wire transfer by close of business tomorrow." $50 million! You are insane! Beatrix shrieked. "We don't have that kind of liquidity." "Then I sell the designs to the Apex Group," I replied, walking toward the door. "Richard has already made an opening offer. I'm sure he would love to build the Zenith right across the street from your empty lot." Tick-tock. Julian. The $50 million wire transfer never arrived. I did not expect it to. The Thorns were not the type of people who paid their debts. They were the type who tried to bury their creditors. Instead of a bank notification, I woke up to a digital assassination. By 8 o'clock the next morning, my face was plastered across every tabloid website in the country. The headlines were brutal and coordinated. The Daily Mail screamed, "Jealous ex-wife tries to sabotage husband's masterpiece." A gossip site ran with, "Veronica the Leech, the woman demanding $50 million for nothing." Beatrix had been busy. She had unleashed a legion of social media bots to swarm my dormant accounts. Within hours, thousands of comments appeared, accusing me of everything from chronic infidelity to severe mental instability. They spun a narrative that I was a hysterical, medication-dependent woman who had hallucinated my contribution to the Zenith. Reporters camped outside my studio apartment in Queens. When I stepped out to get coffee, they shoved microphones in my face, shouting questions about my sanity and my greed. I said nothing. I wore oversized sunglasses, kept my head down, and walked through the flashbulbs like a ghost. Silence scares people like Beatrix more than screaming does because they cannot quote silence. That evening, I sat on my worn-out sofa with Marcus, watching the television. Julian was on a primetime interview show. He was not wearing his power suit. He was wearing a soft beige cashmere sweater, looking small and vulnerable. He squeezed out a tear with the skill of a seasoned actor. I don't understand why she is doing this to me," Julian sobbed, wiping his eyes. "I loved her. I gave her everything. And now she wants to destroy my legacy because she is unhappy. The Zenith is my soul. I spent nights awake, just trying to make it perfect for the city, and she calls it hers." Marcus threw a popcorn kernel at the screen. "He is good. I will give him that. He almost looks human. Let him talk, I said, sipping my tea. The more he claims it is his, the deeper the grave he digs. Is the VPN ready? Encrypted and ready to broadcast. Marcus confirmed. Do it. I did not go to the press. The general public does not understand structural engineering or load-bearing ratios. I went to the people who did. I logged into the 3 most prestigious architectural forums in the world under an anonymous handle. I did not post a rant. I simply uploaded a series of files, the initial sketches of the Zenith from 5 years ago, the CAD files with my original digital signature, and the metadata showing the exact dates and times of creation dates when Julian was documented to be on vacation in the Maldives. Then I waited. It took less than 6 hours for the tide to turn. The internet detectives were fast, but the architectural community was ruthless. Professional architects began dissecting the files. They noticed the stylistic quirks, the specific way I rendered tension cables, the mathematical precision of the curvature, and they matched it to my old university projects, which were public record. They compared it to Julian's total lack of portfolio. By midnight, a new thread was trending on Twitter, Justice for Veronica. Top industry experts began tweeting. One Pulitzer-winning critic wrote, I have looked at the files. There is no way Julian Thorne designed the Zenith. The math in these drafts is genius level. Julian Thorne is a suit. This Veronica woman is the architect. Julian's sob story began to crumble under the weight of cold, hard data. The comments on the news articles shifted from calling me a gold digger to asking why Julian couldn't explain the basic geometry of his building. My phone rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was not a blocked number. It was a direct line from a number I recognized from the industry news. I picked up. Ms. Thorne. A deep, gravelly voice spoke. Or should I say, the actual architect of the Zenith. This is Richard Sterling, CEO of the Apex Group. Mr. Sterling. I replied, my voice steady. I was wondering when you would call. I have been watching your little war, Richard said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. You have a hell of a left hook, kid. But you are fighting with a handgun. How would you like a tank I want to meet? Tonight. I think it is time we discussed a hostile takeover. I will send you the coordinates. I said, come alone. I met Richard Sterling in a private booth at the back of a dimly lit steakhouse in Midtown, a place where deals were made in whispers and handshakes. Richard was a man carved from granite, with silver hair and eyes that held a decades-old grudge. Julian's father had swindled Richard out of a prime waterfront development deal 20 years ago, and Richard had been sharpening his knife ever since. You have the eyes of a woman who wants to burn a kingdom down, Richard said, swirling his scotch. I like that. My legal team is at your disposal. Veronica. We will fund the lawsuit, the PR campaign, everything. In exchange, when the dust settles and Thorne Development is a smoking crater, Apex gets the Zenith. We will build it, and we will put your name on it in 10-foot neon letters. Deal, I said, shaking his hand. But I want more than just the building. I want them to have nothing left to fight with. While I was securing my future, the Thorne dynasty was fracturing from the inside. Back at the penthouse, the air was thick with paranoia. Julian, his nerves frayed by sleepless nights and plummeting public opinion, began to watch Sienna with suspicion. He noticed how she spent hours on her phone in the bathroom and how she flinched whenever he walked into the room. You are awfully quiet today, Julian snapped at her over breakfast. Are you texting another imaginary obstetrician? Sienna did not answer. She had seen the writing on the wall. The ship was sinking, and she was not going to drown with the captain. That afternoon, while Julian was meeting with his panic-stricken lawyers, Sienna logged onto his private laptop. She wasn't trying to save the company. She was downloading 5 years of confidential financial records to a flash drive, planning to sell them to the highest bidder on the black market. But I was not done with them yet. It was time for leverage number 2. I released a second batch of documents to the press. These were not design files. They were procurement orders signed by Julian to cut costs and siphon more money for his lavish lifestyle. Julian had swapped the high-grade reinforced steel I had specified for cheap, non-compliant imports. The reaction was instantaneous. "This is criminal negligence," the news anchor announced that evening. If that tower had been built with these materials, it would have collapsed within a decade. City inspectors swarmed the construction site at 7 o'clock the next morning. By noon, red tape surrounded the perimeter. The Department of Buildings issued an immediate, indefinite stop work order. The Zenith was officially dead in the water. Thorn Development stock, which had been limping along, finally crashed. It dropped to penny stock levels. The banks, sensing blood, triggered the immediate repayment clauses on the massive loans the family had taken out. Beatrix went into survival mode. She tried to initiate an emergency wire transfer of $10 million to an offshore account in the Seychelles, hoping to hide what was left of the family fortune. She sat at her computer, her fingers flying across the keys, only to freeze when a red alert popped up on the screen. Transaction denied. Account frozen by federal authorities. I had anonymously tipped off the SEC about the irregularities in their books days ago. They were under investigation for money laundering. Beatrix screamed, sweeping a vase off her desk and shattering it against the wall. "No. No. They can't do this to me," she shrieked, clawing at her hair. That night, Julian finally broke. He showed up at the door of my studio apartment in Queens, drunk and disheveled. He pounded on the door with his fists, sobbing. V, please," Julian wailed, his voice slurring. "Open the door. I have nowhere else to go. She hates me. Mother hates me. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Just let me in." I watched him through the security camera feed on my phone, sitting comfortably on my couch. I did not move. 2 minutes later, 2 massive private security guards employed by Apex stepped out of a black SUV. They didn't ask him nicely. They grabbed Julian by the arms and dragged him away from my door as he kicked and screamed like a toddler. "Get off me. I am Julian Thorne. I am. His voice faded as they tossed him onto the sidewalk. Across town. Sienna's exit was even less dignified. She had arranged to meet a buyer for the stolen data in a hotel lobby, unaware that the buyer was an investigative journalist working on an exposé. As she handed over the flash drive, Beatrix walked in, followed by police officers she had summoned, desperate to scapegoat anyone she could. "That is her," Beatrix screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Sienna. "She stole our data. Arrest that little thief." Sienna looked at Beatrix, then at the police, her face crumbling. You old witch," Sienna spat, tears streaming down her face. "You deserve this. You are all rotten. I hope you rot in hell." Beatrix slapped her, the sound echoing through the lobby. "Get out," Beatrix hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "Get out of my sight before I kill you myself." Sienna was escorted out in handcuffs, leaving Beatrix standing alone in the lobby, surrounded by whispering strangers, watching the last remnants of her dignity evaporate. The 96-hour countdown to the bank loan default hung over the Thorne family like a guillotine blade. Without the capital from the Zenith project, the entire Thorne empire was mathematically guaranteed to collapse into bankruptcy, desperate and out of options. Julian played his final card. He called a press conference in the grand lobby of the Thorne headquarters, hoping to use his fading charisma to charm the investors back into submission. He stood at the podium, bathed in the harsh white light of the television cameras. He looked terrible. Despite the layers of stage makeup, the dark circles under his eyes were visible, and his hands shook as he gripped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice wavering, "there has been a great deal of misinformation spreading lately. My ex-wife she is unwell. She is a troubled woman who is trying to destroy a legacy she could never understand because of petty jealousy. The Zenith is my vision. It is my soul." The room remained dead silent. No cameras flashed. No reporters scribbled in their notebooks. They stared at him with the cold, predatory boredom of wolves watching a limping deer. His performance was failing. Then the heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open. I walked in, flanked by Marcus and the president of the American Institute of Architects. I did not scream. I did not make a scene. I simply nodded to the audiovisual technician in the corner. A man Marcus had paid $5,000 to ensure the truth was seen. The massive screen behind Julian flickered. His face disappeared, replaced by a high-definition video. It was a time-lapse recording from the security camera in my home studio. It showed me, night after night for 3 years, hunched over the drafting table. It showed the blank page becoming the foundation becoming the skeleton, and the skeleton becoming the zenith. Every line, every calculation, and every revision was there, time-stamped and verified with my digital signature. Then came the audio. My voice filled the hall, clear and sharp. "Julian, I can't do this anymore. I am exhausted." Then Julian's voice rang out, pathetic and whining. "V. Please, just one last time I can't draw the atrium. If I don't show them something, Father will kill me. Just draw it for me. Baby, please, I will buy you that bracelet you wanted." The reporters gasped. 100 camera lenses pivoted simultaneously from the screen to Julian. He stood frozen at the podium, sweat dripping down his forehead, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. The genius architect was exposed as a begging child. Beatrix, sitting in the front row, could not take it. She lunged for the stage, her eyes wild with panic. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Turn it off right now. This is fake. It is all fake." She scrambled up the stairs, reaching for the microphone to cut the feed, but her heel caught on the red carpet. She sprawled face first onto the stage floor, her legs flailing in the air. The cameras captured every second of her humiliation live on national television. I walked to the center of the room, my voice calm but projecting to every corner. "Thorne Development has no architect," I announced. "I am officially severing all ties with this fraudulent organization. The Zenith will be built, but it will be built by me, under the banner of my new firm, Sterling Heights." Before Julian could stammer a defense, the side doors burst open. 6 officers from the Economic Crimes Unit marched in, wearing tactical vests. They walked straight past me and up the stairs to the podium. "Julian Thorne," the lead officer said, pulling out a pair of steel handcuffs. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, grand larceny, and falsifying construction safety records. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists was the loudest sound in the room. As they dragged him away, he looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with absolute terror, while Beatrix lay sobbing on the floor, the ruins of her empire crumbling around her. The fall of the House of Thorne was not a slow decline. It was a controlled demolition, precise and absolute. Julian, the man who had once graced the cover of Forbes as the Prince of Real Estate, was now trading cigarettes for protection in a holding cell. The district attorney was pushing for a sentence of 5 to 10 years in federal prison. His face, once plastered on billboards across the city, was now a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris. Beatrix suffered a fate she considered worse than prison poverty. The banks moved with ruthless efficiency, seizing the penthouse, the summer home in the Hamptons, and even her collection of vintage furs to cover the massive debts Julian had accrued. She was forced to move into a crumbling apartment in a neighborhood she used to make fun of, a place where the elevator never worked and the rent was $700 a month. When she tried to attend a charity gala to beg for help, security escorted her out before she could even reach the hors d'oeuvres. Her friends had deleted her number the moment the assets were frozen. Sienna did not fare any better. Once the spotlight hit her, the cockroaches from her past came crawling out. It turned out I was not the first person she had tried to replace. She had a rap sheet of identity theft and credit card fraud spanning 3 states. With half a dozen lawsuits piling up against her, She packed a single suitcase and fled the city on a Greyhound bus in the middle of the night, vanishing into the obscurity she deserved. I, on the other hand, walked out of the courtroom with everything. The judge awarded me full intellectual property rights to the Zenith and a settlement that stripped the Thorne estate of its last liquid assets. With the settlement money, I attended the foreclosure auction of the Thorne Development headquarters. I bought the building for pennies on the dollar. The next day, workers were already removing the gold T from the lobby floor and replacing it with the sleek steel logo of my new company Sterling Heights. A week later, my phone rang while I was reviewing contracts. The caller ID displayed correctional facility. I accepted the call. V, is that you? Julian's voice was broken, a shadow of the arrogance he once wielded. Please, I can't survive in here. The food, the people. They look at me like I am prey. I need bail. I need a lawyer who actually cares. I promise. I will make it up to you. I still love you. Doesn't that count for something? I listened to him whimper, remembering the cold silence of the penthouse on Christmas Eve. Julian, I said, my voice devoid of pity. This meeting is adjourned. I hung up and blocked the number. The next morning, I walked onto the construction site of the Zenith. The cranes were moving again, but this time they moved to my rhythm. A line of former Thorne employees stood by the trailer, clutching their resumes, looking nervous. I walked down the line, pointing with a decisive finger. You, I said to the structural engineer who had tried to warn Julian about the steel. You are rehired, double salary. I pointed to the marketing VP who had helped spin the lies about me. You, get off my site. You are trespassing. I kept the talent and purged the parasites. By noon, the site was a well-oiled machine, buzzing with the energy of people who knew they were building something real. Richard Sterling pulled up in his black sedan. He walked over the gravel in his Italian loafers, extending a hand not as a savior, but as an equal. You run a tight ship, partner, Richard said, looking up at the steel skeleton rising into the clouds. It is the only way to build something that lasts, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. We were no longer the tycoon and the victim. We were titans of industry standing shoulder to shoulder. I took the construction elevator up to the 40th floor, the highest point currently built. The wind whipped around me, cold and biting, but I did not shiver. I looked out over the sprawling city, a grid of lights and concrete that I had once felt crushed by. Now, it looked like a canvas. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp air. The fever was gone. The fear was gone. All that remained was the fire of ambition, burning brighter than the sun. It has been exactly 365 days since the night my fever broke and my marriage died. The Christmas Eve air was crisp and bit at my exposed skin. But tonight, I did not feel the cold. I stood on a raised platform at the base of the Sterling Zenith, the glass facade of the tower reflecting the thousands of twinkling lights of the city. I was no longer Veronica, the invisible wife who drafted blueprints in a basement while her husband took the bows. I was Veronica Sterling, president and CEO of the most sought-after architectural firm on the East Coast. I looked down at the sea of faces. The press, the investors, and the city officials were all watching me with respect. But my eyes drifted past the velvet ropes and the armed security guards to the public sidewalk beyond the perimeter. There, huddled in a frayed gray coat that had seen better decades, stood a woman I barely recognized. It was Beatrix. She was not on the guest list. She stood outside the gates, shivering, looking at the warmth and the champagne inside with eyes full of a hunger that went beyond food. It was the look of someone who realized far too late that she had bet on the wrong horse. I held her gaze for a single second, then turned away. She was a ghost, and I had stopped believing in ghosts a long time ago. I leaned into the microphone. Architecture is not just about glass and steel, I said, my voice echoing across the plaza. It is about the integrity of the foundation. For too long, this project was built on lies, and like any structure with a weak core, it was destined to collapse. But tonight, we stand on solid ground. We stand on truth. And we stand on the hard work of the people who actually draw the lines, not just the ones who sign them. The applause was thunderous. I raised a hand to quiet them, to honor that truth. I continued, I am announcing the creation of the Arthur Vance Scholarship Fund, named after my father. This fund will provide full tuition for underprivileged architecture students who have the talent but lack the means. And I am pleased to say that the initial endowment of $10 million comes entirely from the liquidation of the former Thorne estate. We are using the ruins of the past to build the architects of the future. I knew that 60 miles away. In the crowded common room of the state penitentiary, a television was broadcasting this live. I could vividly picture Julian sitting on a plastic chair, wearing a jumpsuit that did not fit, forced to watch me shine while the other inmates jeered at the man who had lost it all. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, while I was standing on top of the world. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my blazer. I pulled it out discreetly while the crowd cheered. It was a message from an unknown number. Ms. Sterling, I saw the news. I am back in the city. I can't find work. Nobody will hire me. I will scrub the toilets if I have to. Please. I have nothing to eat. It was Sienna. I looked at the screen, my thumb hovering over the glass. I did not feel anger. I did not feel pity. I felt absolutely nothing. I pressed delete, then blocked the number, erasing her from my universe as easily as I would erase a stray pencil mark. And now, I announced, grabbing the giant ceremonial scissors, it is time to open the doors. I sliced through the red ribbon. Instantly, fireworks erupted from the roof of the tower, painting the night sky in gold and silver. It was exactly 1 year to the minute since I had received that video of Julian at the Gala. The cycle was complete. As I walked down the steps, a man approached me. He was a billionaire tech mogul who had been trying to get a meeting with me for months. Veronica, he said, flashing a charming smile that reminded me too much of a life I had left behind. Dinner. My helicopter is on the roof. We could be in Paris for breakfast. I stopped and looked him in the eye. I am afraid I have plans, I said, gesturing to the group of engineers and foremen waiting for me by the entrance, holding bottles of champagne and slices of pizza. My team is waiting, and I never miss a meeting with the people who matter. I walked past him, joining the men and women who had helped me rebuild my life brick by brick. I looked up at the tower, piercing the clouds, and whispered the final truth to the winter wind. I used to build castles for others and was locked outside. Now, I am the architect, the owner, and the key to my own life. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really hope you enjoyed witnessing Veronica's journey from betrayal to absolute triumph. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening from your bedroom, on your commute, or maybe while working on your own masterpiece? Please leave a comment below and let's chat. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear this story. Your support means the world to me.